The Great Eastern Exodus. Beyond the shuttered factories and economic statistics lay a demographic catastrophe that would reshape Germany for generations. When the wall fell, East Germans gained freedom of movement, and millions used this new liberty to vote with their feet in what became the largest internal migration in modern European history. The numbers tell a staggering story. Between 1989 and 1992 alone, approximately 1.4 million East Germans, roughly 10% of the entire population, packed up their lives and moved westward. The exodus disproportionately consisted of young, educated workers between 18 and 29 years old, precisely the demographic that represented the future economic potential of the region. These statistics represented real communities being hollowed out in real time. The industrial city of Hoyerswerda in Saxony embodies this transformation. Once a showcase socialist city built around energy and chemical industries, Hoyerswerda saw its streets grow quiet as families departed one by one. Schools that once bustled with children fell silent. Housing blocks emptied floor by floor until entire buildings stood abandoned. By the early 2000s, its population had plummeted from nearly 70,000 in 1988 to approximately 40,000, a 43% decline. Similar population collapses transformed dozens of eastern towns. Johanngeorgenstadt lost a third of its residents in just a few years. Weißwasser saw its population fall from 38,000 to under 20,000. What made this migration particularly devastating was its selective nature. The outflow followed a pattern sociologists call brain drain. The most educated and economically valuable residents departed first. Technical university graduates from Dresden and Leipzig headed to Stuttgart and Munich. Doctors abandoned rural clinics for better-paying positions in Hamburg and Frankfurt. Engineers left behind crumbling factories for modern facilities in West Germany's industrial heartland. The demographic profile of those who left was remarkably consistent. Young, mostly under 30, well-educated, and often female. This created a profound gender imbalance in many eastern regions, with some towns reporting ratios of 100 women to 120 men in the critical 18 to 35 age bracket by the early 2000s. Some rural communities in Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania found themselves with so few young women that local officials genuinely worried about the future viability of their towns. This massive migration set in motion a vicious economic spiral that resembled a downward helix. As working-age residents departed, local tax revenues collapsed. With fewer taxpayers, municipalities couldn't maintain infrastructure or essential services. As services deteriorated, more residents left, further eroding the tax base. Each turn of this spiral accelerated the next. Declining population led to business closures, which triggered more unemployment, which prompted more outmigration, which further weakened the tax base. Many towns entered what economists termed a death spiral, where recovery became nearly impossible without external intervention. The former industrial city of Bitterfeld demonstrates this cycle perfectly. As its chemical plants closed, the initial wave of unemployment drove away younger workers. This reduced local consumer spending, forcing small businesses to close. The declining population meant fewer students in schools, leading to school closures. Reduced public services made the area less attractive, prompting even more departures. By the mid-1990s, Bitterfeld had lost nearly a quarter of its pre-unification population. For those who remained, the psychological impact was profound. Many experienced what sociologists termed abandonment syndrome, the feeling of being left behind by neighbors, family members, and the entire economic system. Older residents felt stranded in increasingly empty towns where every shuttered shop window and abandoned apartment building served as a reminder of community decline. Interviews with Eastern residents during this period reveal a consistent pattern of psychological distress. "It feels like we're just waiting for the lights to go out," said one 58-year-old former factory worker in a 1998 study of post-reunification migration. A town council member from Saxony-Anhalt told researchers, "First we lost our jobs, then we lost our children." This sense of collective abandonment contributed to higher rates of depression, alcoholism, and social isolation in the affected regions. The migration created peculiar economic contradictions across Germany. While unemployment in eastern regions remained stubbornly high, certain western cities simultaneously experienced labor shortages. Construction firms in Munich struggled to find workers, while qualified builders in Dresden remained jobless. This paradox highlighted deeper structural problems in how Germany's labor market functioned. By the mid-1990s, Western regions began active recruitment campaigns targeting Eastern workers. Baden-Württemberg's manufacturing sector regularly sent recruiters to technical schools in Saxony. Hospitals in North Rhine-Westphalia offered signing bonuses to medical professionals from the East. This active poaching of human capital further accelerated the brain drain from regions that desperately needed to retain their skilled workforce. What makes this exodus remarkable is that it occurred despite massive financial transfers flowing in the opposite direction. As billions of marks poured eastward for infrastructure and industrial subsidies, hundreds of thousands of eastern citizens traveled westward. Money flowing east and people flowing west became the defining circulation pattern of post-reunification Germany. The demographic consequences continue today, 3 decades after reunification. The population pyramid of Eastern German states shows a distinctive narrowing in the 35 to 50 age range, precisely the generation that left in the 1990s. Eastern regions face a rapidly aging population, with some districts having median ages approaching 50. This demographic skew creates enormous challenges for healthcare systems, elder care, and economic dynamism. Perhaps most concerning is the generational echo of this migration. Children never born to the generation that left represent a second demographic wave of depletion. Fertility rates in eastern regions plummeted after reunification, falling to just 0.77 children per woman in eastern regions by 1994. Even as birth rates have partially recovered, the missing generation of potential rebuilding the East, the infrastructure challenge. While eastern communities scrambled to attract new residents, German officials confronted a far more concrete problem: the dilapidated physical foundation they'd inherited from the GDR. The challenge wasn't just economic or demographic. It was literally embedded in the crumbling concrete, rusting rails, and contaminated soil of the former East. The physical infrastructure that undergirded every aspect of daily life had deteriorated to a point that no amount of currency conversion or privatization could address. This wasn't just about repairing buildings. It was about rebuilding the fundamental systems that make a modern economy possible. The state of East Germany's infrastructure stunned West German engineers. Roads had deteriorated beyond simple repair, with cracked surfaces and dangerous potholes dominating the landscape. Rivers ran with untreated sewage from outdated treatment facilities. Communication relied on pre-war telephone exchanges, leaving citizens waiting a decade for basic connectivity. Railway bridges stood precariously close to collapse, while power plants belched pollution far exceeding Western environmental standards. These weren't isolated problems, but interconnected failures of the essential building blocks that underpin modern society. To address this crisis, the federal government launched the Transportation Projects German Unity in 1991, comprising 17 megaprojects, with an initial budget of 56 billion marks. These projects formed the skeleton of unified Germany's infrastructure, creating a network of railways, highways, and waterways connecting east and west. The Berlin-Nuremberg rail line, threading through once divided territories, became a symbolic artery for the new Germany at a cost exceeding 10 billion euros. Transportation represented only the first layer of necessary development. The housing situation in eastern cities revealed decades of neglect. In historic Leipzig, Dresden, and Rostock, apartments lacked basic amenities like private bathrooms and central heating. Entire neighborhoods of pre-war buildings stood at risk of collapse, their facades crumbling and interiors dangerous for habitation. The Urban Development and Housing Construction Law of 1993 transformed these decaying residential areas through tax incentives that attracted Western investment. The program rebuilt or renovated over 3.6 million housing units, reshaping the living conditions for millions of Eastern Germans. Each city embraced different approaches to renewal. Dresden reconstructed its Baroque Neumarkt district with meticulous attention to historical detail, rebuilding the Frauenkirche stone by stone as a phoenix rising from war and communist neglect. Leipzig adopted its optimistic Leipzigkant campaign, renovating Europe's largest railway terminal and converting abandoned industrial sites into vibrant cultural spaces. These cities demonstrated how infrastructure investment could preserve cultural heritage while creating functional, modern urban environments. Telecommunications infrastructure represented a remarkable leap forward. With only 1.8 million telephone connections for 16 million people in 1990, Eastern Germany existed in an almost pre-modern communication landscape. Deutsche Telekom committed to installing 1.8 million kilometers of fiber optic cable, building over 13,000 connection points across the region. By 1997, Eastern Germany had transformed from rotary phones and party lines to digital connectivity, surpassing many Western regions. A dramatic example of how infrastructure investment allowed Eastern communities to bypass decades of technological stagnation. Environmental contamination presented perhaps the most challenging infrastructure deficit. Beneath the visible landscape lay poisoned soil and water from decades of industrial production with minimal regulation. The Bierfeld chemical complex had created a toxic moonscape spanning 25 square kilometers, while uranium mining operations left behind radioactive waste piles visible from space. Rivers in industrial regions ran colors that changed with the day's production schedule, devoid of fish or plant life. The Environmental Rehabilitation Program committed over 40 billion euros to cleaning these sites. The Wismut uranium mining cleanup alone cost 13 billion euros, involving the removal of radioactive soil and treatment of contaminated groundwater. By 2005, Eastern German waterways showed remarkable recovery, with fish returning to rivers that had been biologically dead for generations. Between 1991 and 2018, infrastructure spending in Eastern Germany reached 2.1 trillion euros, the largest peacetime infrastructure program in European history. This massive investment transformed the physical landscape of Eastern Germany, creating world-class highways, digital networks, renovated cities, and cleaner environments. However, the economic impact proved uneven. Major cities like Dresden, Leipzig, and parts of Berlin thrived, while smaller communities and rural areas saw minimal benefit despite proximity to new infrastructure. Expensive industrial parks stood empty, and upgraded regional airports eventually closed due to insufficient traffic. As economics professor Ulrich Blum observed, Germany built the hardware of a modern economy, but neglected the software, the businesses and human capital needed to utilize it. The distribution of infrastructure spending revealed concerning patterns, with approximately 62% of major projects centered around Berlin, Dresden, and Leipzig, regions representing just 30% of Eastern Germany's population. Rural areas in Brandenburg, Mecklenburg-Western Pomerania, and Saxony-Anhalt received disproportionately less investment despite facing greater economic challenges. Perhaps most disappointing was how infrastructure investments failed to generate expected economic multiplier effects in many regions. While construction created temporary employment, the anticipated wave of private investment materialized unevenly. As former Transport Minister Kurt Bodwig acknowledged in 2008, we built world-class infrastructure anticipating businesses would naturally follow. That proved overly optimistic in many regions.